From our 22 News Broadcast Center, this is 22 News in Focus.
Good afternoon and welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Ciara Speller. For many of us, the holidays are a happy time for family and celebration. But unfortunately, for people in recovery from addiction, holidays can be a trigger for stress, making it hard to maintain sobriety. So in this half hour of 22 News in Focus, we'll be looking at how to reduce the stress and keep recovery on track. Joining me now is Enrique Vargas Gonzalez, an outpatient psychotherapist at the Gandara Center. Thanks for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, so let's talk about addiction and recovery. Most people think of, substance abuse as drugs and alcohol, but people can also be addicted to food, shopping, gambling, and other behaviors. Let's talk about what is addiction.
Yes, so addiction can be defined as a treatable chronic medical disease that interferes in different aspects of a person's life, including physiological, psychological, and social. And like you said, aside from substance use addiction, there are also other called process or behavioral addictions, such as the ones you mentioned, internet addiction, and others that are still being studied. But yes, a person can develop addictive behavior or express in different ways.
Yeah, and so what does it mean to be in recovery?
Recovery is a process of change through which a person improves their health and wellness. They live a more self-directed life and strive to reach their full potential. Recovery means an individual process, is different for everybody, and it means having more control, decreasing or abstaining from substance use.
And I just want to ask you, what are the most common types of help available for those that are seeking recovery?
The help available depends on the level of care. It can be from counseling, substance use counseling. It can be more intensive, such as a residential or detox program, or it can be even more intensive in a hospitalization or a medically managed intensive care, depending on the severity of the case.
Yeah, and so, we have lived through the COVID-19 pandemic and many people doing things virtually. Is that also an option?
Yes, there are now many of, for instance, Alcoholic Anonymous meetings, NA meetings, all kinds of self-group supports, and also counseling via telehealth and other services like group support and meetings in general.
Really
yes.
important to know that. And once someone has completed a program, what support programs are there to help them keep, on the path to wellness?
So going back to your previous question, recovery is a long-term process and it requires different levels of care. So once a person, let's say, goes from a more intensive level of care to less intensive, there can be options such as outpatient substance use and usually mental health counseling, as well as self-help groups and support groups that are available almost everywhere for different, in different languages, different types of cultures and different ages and different just people in general for different communities. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we've talked about recovery, but what happens if somebody relapses?
So something we have to understand is that relapse is actually part of our recovery process. It happens more often than not. And a person relapsing doesn't mean they are going back to the beginning of their recovery process, but actually in a substance use or recovery setting, we take a relapse as an opportunity to improve and to get better quicker. So relapse is part of recovery.
And so what types of challenges are people in recovery facing due to the pandemic?
Well, people in recovery face a lot of challenges. I would say because of the pandemic, the challenges are even bigger. We've seen people relapsing and falling off their treatment processes because the pandemic caused a lot of services to stop. A lot of people couldn't attend meetings. A lot of people couldn't access their medication treatments that are available or used to be available. And so now they are trying to get back on track now that we are moving, to the post-pandemic area. However, the pandemic was very hard on people, especially in recovery.
Yeah, and we talked about recovery and the pandemic, but what are the numbers looking like for people that are being impacted by the pandemic, in terms of, substance abuse?
So the thing is that people being isolated, people being at home started to have, if not access, more access, at least more opportunities to use substances such as alcohol, or also to use even prescribed medications that they were not considering before, or they were putting aside as a last resort. Yes, and also not only adults, but also teenagers, adolescents, and even we've seen cases with children who, because they didn't know what they were taking. So yes, it put people at risk because of being isolated and at home, which I have to say, isolation is one of the biggest risks for a person who might be using substances or abusing them, or who might be at risk of developing an addiction.
Yeah, and it's important for people to know that they're not alone, right? So, how do you make sure to let people know that they aren't alone?
Yeah, I would say connection is the most important part of a recovery process. And also, if a person is at risk, also connection might be important. Just talk to people, know who would be supporting you, know who might be there for you if you need it. And there's also professional help, of course. So there's both sides, right? The personal and the professional.
All right, Enrique, thank you.
Thank you.
And we're going to continue our conversation when we return. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about addiction and recovery services with Enrique Vargas Gonzalez, a psychotherapist at Gandara Center. The Gandara Center offers several options for people in recovery, so I want to ask you, what is a recovery center?
Yes, Recovery Center is a specialized treatment center that offers several options for people who are starting or thinking about starting their recovery process, and also for people who have been in recovery for some time. So they offer different types of groups and also services by providers that have the special training for their recovery process.
And let's talk a little bit about a peer, the model of a peer recovery center, rather.
Yeah, a peer recovery center is a different approach, meaning that in these places you're going to find people also who have experienced a recovery or are in the process of recovery. So they have the personal experience, and they can help, they can guide, they can advise, and they can also offer resources within the community. They can take them, and it's a big support. So recovery centers are a great addition to their recovery process.
And how many recovery centers does Gandara have?
Gandara has 5 recovery centers. 2 of them are located in this area. One in Holyoke, which is Hope for Holyoke, and the other one is Valor Recovery Center in Springfield. The other ones are all around the state of Massachusetts.
Yeah, and how can people participate in those recovery centers?
People can just go, they can find the information on the website. They can go to gandaracenter.org, and they can see the options, and they can just walk in. There is no need for a referral, or there's no need for make an appointment or anything like that.
Yeah, so people can just walk in, like you said. Once they walk in, what's that process like?
So they would be asked, what is exactly they're looking for. It's a very flexible kind of place for them. So it will be at their pace. They will not be asked to do anything they're not willing to do. They can just be there, see how everything works, what other people are doing, and then someone might approach them and just try to, explain what they do at the center. And if they want to participate in any way, they are free to participate. They can come and go as they want, as they need.
Yeah, and a little bit before the break, we briefly talked about seeing an increase in people applying for these programs. So again, let's talk about what you're seeing.
Yes, I would say that more people are applying because more people are needing the services, and also hopefully because more people are becoming aware that there are supports like these. So people are being more interested in asking and accepting the help that is being offered.
Yeah. And what's involved in outpatient treatment during recovery?
Well, outpatient treatment can mean different things. Basically, the counseling aspect, which can cover the substance use and the mental health aspect, as well as groups such as substance use groups, group meetings, and other like anger management, emotional regulation, as well as other programs that can be supportive as well, such as, for example, recovery coaching. Gandara offers other services such as community support, case managers, recovery navigators. A lot of different programs aim to create a community of recovery and support for the person.
And how would somebody go about enrolling to apply for treatment through Gandara?
The easiest way would be to go to the website, and you can see all of the programs that Gandara has available. You can call and you can make an appointment. You can also call the outpatient clinic at 413-736-0395, and then they will be able to guide you through the intake process and schedule an appointment for whatever services you might require or need. And also, once you start treatment, the provider can also make the referrals that can be necessary for your treatment in regards of mental health and substance use.
Yeah, and so maybe somebody's a little hesitant because they think that they might not be able to afford these services. You know, what's their option?
Yeah, they can call, they can receive services are not denied to a person regardless of their insurance situation. But I would advise people to call because whatever services we can provide, we will provide, and we can work with everybody. The services are for all the community, and there's always services that are free of charge. So, yes.
And maybe somebody's on the fence thinking they want help, but they're just not exactly sure, you know, where to turn. What would you tell them?
I would say that is probably the biggest and most difficult step to take, to accept that we need help, especially when it comes to substance use. But I think if we just do an internal analysis of what is happening in our lives, and if we believe that because of the use of a certain substance or drug or medication that our life is changing and not in a good way, just being honest with ourselves, we don't have to talk with anybody. From there, we can maybe start to see that we might need help, and the help is there. And the people that work in the recovery areas or recovery services understand that this is one of the most important steps. Mm-hmm.
And you know, the holiday season is here. We have Christmas, we have New Year's, a time when a lot of people are celebrating, they're partying, they might be around alcohol, triggers for people. You know, what do you think people who are in recovery, who, you know, might be impacted by those types of things around them, what steps can they take?
Yeah, it's very important that they remember that if they are in recovery or they believe they have a substance use problem at any level, they want to prevent, they want to make a plan, they want to think of how the holiday season, how these different type of interactions that we engage during the holidays might affect them, might increase the amount of alcohol they drink, the amount of any type of substance they use. So some of the recommendations, for example, are bring a friend, avoid situations or reunions that you really don't think will be positive for you. Try to, an acronym that we use in recovery is HALT, H-A-L-T, which means try to avoid being hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. If you try to focus on that, which is a self-care strategy, you have a bigger chance to avoid situations that might put you at risk. So if you don't have any type of professional service, but you can just try to think about what is best for you, especially during this holiday season, and you might have to change adjustments to your regular routine. Do those changes, and as long as they're positive for your health.
Okay, really good insight. Thank you so much. When we return, learn how to prevent a relapse. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus, and today we're talking about resources and programs for addiction treatment, how people in recovery can prevent a relapse. So, Enrique, I want to ask you, in general, do you see an increase in relapses or overdoses during the holidays?
Well, yes, there is an increase because the potential risk for use is higher. Also because there's a lot, like I've mentioned before, different kinds of interactions within family members, people who don't understand what recovery means. They might be pushing people into using or triggering people into using. That's why it is always recommended that people look for more help and support during the holiday season, meaning more meetings, more support groups, more engaging with friends that are also in recovery so they can feel a stronger connection.
Yeah, and we touched on alcohol, during the holidays being a trigger, but also drugs. People are struggling with drug addiction. So I want to ask you, what is Narcan and how can it help in the opioid epidemic?
So Narcan is actually a medication that is used as a nasal spray. It helps revert the effects of an opioid overdose. It's very helpful because it can save lives. It's very easy to use. It doesn't require any special training. It can be used by anybody, and it can be used on anybody who might be experiencing an overdose or that we suspect might be experiencing an overdose.
Yeah, and in terms of where you can find it, I know a lot of cities and towns have set up areas where people can easily access Narcan. So can you talk about some of those places?
Yes, in Massachusetts you can find Narcan at any pharmacy, actually. You can go to a pharmacy and you can get it from there, either through your insurance or even if you don't have insurance, you can access it. Also, you can get it from certain community agencies such as in this area, Tapestry Health, which is one of the ones that are working more with the communities in terms of harm reduction and including Narcan, which is one of the strategies.
And what can family members or friends and colleagues do to help someone who they think might be in need of help?
Yeah, if you think someone you know needs help, something you can do, and I won't say it's going to work the first time, but it's talk to them. Be honest and explain to them why you think they might need help. Because one of the biggest aspects of recovery and starting the process of recovery is becoming aware that one has a problem. So this happens only by increasing the awareness of that, and people can actually help, family can actually help. But sometimes, depending on our beliefs or our culture, we don't talk about it. We just let the person do what they do, and then when it's too late, well, it's too late.
And for people watching a loved one struggle, that's really hard for them because they love that person, they care about that person. Like you said, the first attempt, they might not be willing to listen and get the help. But what would you say to those who are encouraging somebody to get help?
I would say that it's also important that the family engages in their recovery. And sometimes it might even be necessary that the family starts the recovery, even if that doesn't make much sense. Meaning there's also support groups for family members. There's also meetings for people who can receive some education, some information about how an addiction works and how an addiction affects not only the person, but also the whole family and the dynamics. So it's not just the person in recovery, it's the whole family in recovery. And that's why the families, if they think something is happening, they need to start working towards that recovery as well.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about the holidays, they're here, which means that the winter is quickly approaching as well. Some addicts are homeless, so what are your concerns with that as the cold weather, makes its way here?
Yes, there are many concerns, especially when the weather changes. For that reason, a lot of people homeless, and not only they don't have a home or a place where they go to sleep every night, but they also don't have a family connection with other people, or the connections they have might be, well, negative in the sense that they might be triggering or encouraging the use of certain substances. You can see more overdoses and more people end up at the emergency room because, well, this is happening, especially during this time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And if someone who's struggling with addiction is listening to this program right now and they're in need of help, what should they do at, right at this moment?
I think the services and the help for people who are or might want to start a recovery are always available. That's something important to know, but it requires readiness. It requires that I actually see that I have a problem and that I actually want to do something about it. Because no matter how much we try, even though treatment in some severe cases can be pushed on a person, you need to want to do something about the problem. And there's always help. There are many supports, including the Gandara Center, but there are many other agencies in the state, and also hotlines that you can always call, and they will always be there for referring you for the services you might need.
Yeah, and we have, how people can contact Gandara Center right now. We have that on their screen. So, just adding to that. Yeah,
calling or going to the website to review all of the services that we provide. And again, once you start treatment with any of our providers or services, we can help you refer you to any of the other services that we have available within our agency or any other agencies.
Okay, Enrique, thank you so much. And I'll have some closing words when we return. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You've been watching 22 News in Focus, and today we've been talking about resources and programs for addiction treatment in our region with Enrique Vargas Gonzalez of the Gandara Center. Enrique, we want to thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you to you at home for watching. If you missed any of it, you will be able to find it on our website at wwlp.com. From all of us here at 22 News, have a great day.
From our 22 News Broadcast Center, this is 22 News in Focus.
Good afternoon and welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Ciara Speller. The nationwide children and teens are in the midst of a mental health crisis, struggling with anxiety and depression, and the numbers are growing. A report by the Annie E. Casey Foundation found that anxiety and depression in children across the country rose by nearly 26% from 2016 to 2020. In Massachusetts, the percent increase was nearly double during that time. On today's program, we're looking at what resources and programs are available through the Center for Human Development to help children and families in dealing with stress and mental health issues. So joining me now is Christy O'Brien, Program Director of the Center for Human Development's Community Behavioral Health Center in Chicopee. We want to thank you so much for being here with us, Christy.
Thank you so much for having me.
So in Massachusetts, or rather, I should say, first give us, our viewers, some background on the Center for Human Development and the different services that are offered.
Absolutely. So the Center for Human Development is a large behavioral health organization all throughout Western Massachusetts and into Connecticut. We just celebrated our 50-year anniversary, which was thrilling. And during that 50-year time, during those 5 decades, the main mission and focus of the Center for Human Development was to really identify the challenge areas, the mental health need areas for individuals and families, and to develop and acquire services to meet those needs as best as possible. So for instance, we have a wide variety of mental health clinics throughout the region and offer outpatient mental health services, psychiatry, the gamut of substance use services. We help support individuals who are negotiating intellectual and developmental disabilities, folks experiencing homelessness and housing insecurities, juveniles in the juvenile justice system, foster care, children in early intervention. Really runs the gamut of all the services that really would benefit all different kinds of areas in the community. I'm particularly excited tonight to talk to you a little bit more about one of our newest services that will relate to some of the statistics you talked about a few minutes ago.
And so the State Executive Office of Health and Human Services has responded to the need for expanded access to mental health treatment for children, teens, and adults by designating 25 behavioral health and substance use providers in Massachusetts to receive the state's newly developed Community Behavioral Health Center designation. So CHD was awarded this designation. I want to ask you, what is a Community Behavioral Health Center and what does that model look like?
Yes, this is a great question. We're very excited about this. The state really took this as the information you just shared, this increasing need for response to the ever-increasing mental health emergencies, and a lot of which show up in the emergency departments. Emergency departments are completely flooded and really struggling to sort of keep up with those kinds of patients as well as those in medical emergencies. So this is the state's response, and it's really designed to ease and sort of streamline access to urgent behavioral health services. It's really to design a gateway, if you will, to sort of the spectrum of urgent behavioral health services. So, for instance, at the Center for Human Development, we will open our Community Behavioral Health Center on January 3rd of 2023 in Chicopee, and we will offer services to the designated catchment area that we have, which includes towns that include Chicopee, Holyoke, South Hadley, Granby, Belchertown, Ware, Palmer, Southampton, Ludlow, and Munson. I can keep going and going and going. So what I really want to be more specific about is within these community behavioral health centers, it really offers, as you sort of said, the spectrum of crisis intervention services. So if we have an individual who is struggling, who's having such a challenging situation, struggling so significantly that they don't feel safe, or they don't feel safe around others, or their functioning is so compromised that they really need some immediate intervention. So one of the services under this umbrella of the Community Behavioral Health Center is mobile crisis intervention. So we will be able, of course, to provide an assessment of and immediate intervention services within our Community Behavioral Health Center, but we'll also be able to meet them in the community if that is the better option, at a school, in their home, wherever they are situated, and to provide a pinpoint of assessment immediately, as immediately as possible.
And I want to ask you now, are your programs seeing an increased demand in services for children and youth?
Absolutely. So just as some of the statistics you've talked about, we anecdotally very much feel the growth. We're also aware that, mental health emergencies, people showed up to emergency departments, in particular children and youth, at a double-digit increased rate just between 2020 and 2021. Certainly, COVID really challenged a lot of behavioral health diagnoses that were already sort of existing, and then added on a whole new slew of stressors. And that's really kind of come to a head, and we haven't really seen a slowage. I mean, I think one of the benefits is that as a society, we've gotten a lot better at sort of naming what these challenge areas are, really being better at identifying them and offering treatment services of them. But we are absolutely in a position right now of overwhelming need.
And how will the health center model help support mental health services for children, youth, and adults?
Again, this idea of it being a gateway, I mean, it really is a point of intervention for really urgent behavioral health crises. But that urgency really falls along kind of a spectrum. So someone could come in with something on the more urgent side. We perform that crisis evaluation. It could also be somebody just, struggling more mildly and really looking to get into services, or looking to get their child set up with services. So we have outpatient behavioral health therapy, we have in-home based therapy, we have access to psychiatry within 3 days, and then we look sort of at what the family or what the individual is contending with, and look along our continuum of services throughout CHD and see what else might be helpful in the process.
Yeah, and for people who are just joining now, our viewers back at home, how can they learn more about CHD?
Absolutely. So chd.org is a really fantastic, very interactive website that can help folks navigate their specific areas of interest. But I would say being in touch with us at any point at 1-844-CHD-HELP is another fantastic way. We'd love to speak to anybody over the phone.
And do you also have, social media platforms that people can visit?
Yes, we do. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, the gamut.
Okay, thank you so much, Christy. The holidays can bring additional stress to children and teens, and we'll have that discussion when we return. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Welcome back to 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about stress, anxiety, and other mental health issues among teens and children with Christy O'Brien from the Center for Human Development. The holidays are supposed to be a fun and joyous time, but holiday stress, high expectations, and overstimulation can trigger anxiety for children. And some children live in homes where the holidays are not a good time. So, Christy, I want to ask you, do children and teens experience additional stress and anxiety at the end of the year? And what are some of those triggers?
Absolutely right. I mean, a lot of the work that we're doing to roll out our new community behavioral health centers, we've been partnering with all the schools in our catchment area. And repeatedly what we are hearing, especially in the most recent weeks, is that this is a categorically different time of year, that children are acting out in different ways, a lot of the anxieties that they do seem to carry. And I think you hit the nail on the head in a couple of ways. I think expectations that we hold of what holidays are, what they mean, what they look like, what they should look like, can be pretty skewed. I think there's an expectation to live up to. And if you and your family, let's say, don't meet that one expectation that kind of as a society we haven't truly expanded very far from, I think it can be triggering in and of itself. I also think, and again, what we've heard from adjustment counselors very specifically, is you go into a vacation, a break from school, their children, adolescents, your entire sense of structure is really different for a chunk of time there. And that brings up a lot of different changes and variations that causes destabilization, I think, as well.
Yeah, and this is kind of two-sided, right? You know, it's important for parents to remain calm and listen and address their children's concerns, but it's something new for them as well, you know, seeing their child go through this. So how would you, tell them to kind of just walk through this, the steps they should take? Absolutely right.
I mean, I think first and foremost, you know your child better than anyone else. And the great thing about parenting is that from a psychological perspective, we know statistically significantly that we do not have to be perfect parents. All we have to be is good enough, and good enough oftentimes means listening and noticing subtle changes in your child, noticing ways in which their behavior might have shifted enough to really key you into something's up, they're struggling. I need to slow myself down enough to help them slow down and have us have a communication, a conversation.
Right, and so regular routines can be interrupted with extra holiday activities and breaks from school, things like that. So some children need some type of continuity to feel secure. How important is it to maintain a sleep schedule?
I mean, personally, I think quite important. I think just as you said, when structure is changed or removed, that can be fun. I mean, that is part of the fun time of vacation, but it does have an impact. I mean, I think sleep, we know, again, statistically, how much that impacts how we feel, how we behave, how we function. And, as much as parents and families are able to stick to a schedule that feels, healthy but also realistic, I think that's finding the balance in there is what's going to be really helpful. Nothing's going to be perfect, and nor does it have to be. But I think as you're identifying, paying attention to it and its impact is probably the place to start.
Yeah, and any suggestions on how parents can get their children back on track?
I think identifying and really having a conversation and just naming it is a good place to start. Like, we're having this great time, we're doing these different things. We're also going to be mindful of the schedule we just came from and the schedule we're heading back into. And so oftentimes for younger children, that can be times of reading together at nighttime, doing typical sleep schedule routines, getting out during the daytime for what would be, recess exercise. Doing these things that, these are ideals, whatever's practical and ways just to sort of continue some of these processes is probably the best to shoot for.
Right, and another change during the holidays is food, right? So you go to parties, there's lots of sweets and treats and things that children don't necessarily get when they're at school.
Right.
So how important is it to minimize the amount of treats that kids eat and to keep them on a regular meal schedule?
I think it's a great question. And I think, same really as you're asking that, I'm thinking of myself, because this goes for adults as well. These are treats. These are to be enjoyed. Let's be realistic about it. But also, again, really paying attention to helping. I think it's a good intervention, I could say, a good opportunity to help a child notice when we have a meal that's a lot of sugar, how do we notice our body change? And then how do we notice how that impacts our behavior? And then how do we regulate after that? I think just bringing some awareness to, how the body behaves, it really does lend itself down the road to mental health, and it develops a nice conversation. Balance the meals as much as we can, but honestly, it's also about habits and not about one-offs holiday seasons too, I think.
Yeah, and I want to talk about balancing activities now. Because thinking back to when I was younger, I loved the holiday plays, I danced, loved being in the Christmas concerts and recitals, but that's not something that everybody loves, and it might be kind of stressful for them. So talk about, when should parents think that maybe this is just a little bit too much?
I love that question. And I think it does also speak to, what is expectation? What is our celebration of a holiday? What is our routine? What is a treat and what is too much? And acknowledging for families that not every child fits into that model, and that, similarly when we talk about holidays, I think we're thinking of some very specific ones. There is the gamut of holidays. There is the a wide variety of practices that are celebrated and not celebrated. And just to sort of identify for kids and families that nothing is one set expectation. There isn't one experience that's going to fit for everybody.
Yeah, and quiet time during the holidays, I'm sure that's big, right? So
Yes.
what are some of the things that, parents can do to help an overexcited child?
Right. It definitely depends, of course, on your child's age, their stage of development. Reading is a great opportunity. Games, quiet games. Walks outside. We're in winter, but we have mild enough winters at the moment that we can get outside, and I think getting fresh air and grounding in that way is really a good exercise. There are some kids who are super open to meditation and body scanning and things like that. Folks along that sort of end of the spectrum, or that's a great opportunity for them. I think that most parents are going to be able to identify what those things look like within their families, and then maybe to try out some new ones as well.
Yeah, and with the holiday season, comes kind of the hustle and bustle and maybe moving kind of fast-paced. What are some things that you can include children and teens in, age-appropriate chores to make them feel included as well?
Absolutely. I mean, I think let's say we're talking about holiday decorating, holiday meal preparation, really working in some time to develop an expectation for oftentimes parents ourselves to bake with a child, and knowing that it's going to take longer and it's going to be messy, and embrace the process. I think helping kids wrap gifts. I think some of us still have leaves on the ground. Doing collectively a chore together and getting children used to contributing, I think, sets a great model in and of itself.
Yeah, and how about social settings? The malls are busy places. Family parties might be even, a little bit crowded. What are some things, some tips that, can be worked in there?
I love this question. I think it's really important to help your child understand what their behavior in social environments is like and what happens to them. I think this is a great way to begin to identify, like adults, we're really able to identify, are we introverted, are we extroverted, are we ambiverted, where are we on the spectrum, and how do we relate in those situations? I think it's great to begin naming that for kids. What sorts of situations do they feel most comfortable in, and to begin to notice how that is.
All right, Christy, thank you. We'll continue our conversation after the break. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus, and today we've been talking about holiday stress and anxiety in children and teens. Christy, I want to ask you now, what are some signs that parents and caregivers should recognize that their child may be on the verge of a meltdown?
I think it's really subjective to everyone's child. They're going to know their children, and they're going to know changes as they occur. For some kids, they're going to behaviorally act out in really big, obvious ways. And other kids, they're going to get really quiet. They're going to focus inwards. And as a parent, your intuition about what's going on with your kids is going to tell you sort of what direction they're headed in.
Yeah, and let's say before a parent contacts your office, should they contact their pediatrician first?
I would say, much like we're going to talk about in the Community Behavioral Health Center, what we're looking to do across our mental health services is to really alleviate some of the medical services. If there are urgent behavioral health needs that we can really help support, then I think calling us is probably a great place to start, or their other local behavioral health provider. One of the reasons, for instance, going back to the Community Behavioral Health Center initiative, is that the EDs are overloaded. And so if we are able to recognize when we or our children are having a medical emergency, we go to a hospital. When our children or we are having a mental health emergency, your local community-based health center is the place to go for mental health acuity as well.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up with what are some of the children's behavioral health services that are offered?
So we do outpatient therapy. We also do in-home therapy. In-home therapy services in particular, well, actually really wherever you're served, you're going to be wrapped tightly. When you serve a child, you serve a family. And there is not one way to break out one from the other, really. And whoever sort of is in that identified family is going to be a part of the care plan. And oftentimes that can mean a series of outpatient providers. It could be a therapeutic mentor or a youth mentor, someone to really develop conversation and relationship with in an experiential way, in a way where the provider also comes from some perspective, some history of shared mental health challenges as well. And then whatever other resources, sometimes psychiatry is involved, but to develop a team approach, whether it's in an office or in a home, is how that will operate.
Yeah, and so the services that are in a home, walk us through what that might look like.
Of course. It is, it's fantastic because it really places the therapist in the home setting where the things are occurring, where the challenges are occurring, where the child might feel most comfortable. It's also something that can extend to schools. Very often our in-home therapy teams will work in all the major environments that the child is a part of. Let's say someone comes into our community-based health center and is saying, my child needs some additional help. Let's say they come in to our Chicopee site for a crisis evaluation. One of the great things about this new center is that we can meet that need in the moment. We can meet with the family, meet with the child, and let's say we've identified they could really benefit from removing themselves from the home environment. We would offer them a bed in our child's crisis stabilization unit right there under the same roof in our community behavioral health center. And in doing so, we create a whole service plan with all their providers in that regard as well. They'd stay with us for a short amount of time. We'd have family therapy, we'd have individual therapy with them, psychiatry, nursing, and we'd wrap it all together and then graduate them to the next level of care. So it really can look like many different things depending on an individual's need.
And how about virtual services?
Absolutely, all available. We really love and prefer in person so that we can bond a little bit better and develop rapport and really do all the things that therapists do when they develop relationships. But we will accommodate whatever is needed for the family to make services available.
And we touched on earlier, that while a child might be suffering, from something new, that they're not really sure what they're going through, anxiety, things like that, it also takes a toll on the family. So do you offer services for the entire family?
Absolutely right. And I'm so glad you pointed that out. It is very much impossible, I think, for a caregiver, a guardian, a parent to negotiate their child's mental health without experiencing some strain. So all the services that we offer for youth, we offer for adults as well, including, let's say, they're in need of crisis evaluation at some point too. We have those urgent outpatient behavioral health services available to them. We have traditional outpatient therapy. We also have family mentors. If you are experiencing a family mental health crisis, we also have peer level positions, peer level staff who will help them from their experience of such challenges to help them negotiate through that as well.
Mm-hmm. And CHD is involved with children who are in the foster care system.
That's
so
right.
Do you have mental health services geared towards their specific situations?
Absolutely, yeah. It's definitely worked very much into those programs to support individuals in foster services and the caregivers that they are working with, and oftentimes their biological parents as well. Again, whatever in more of an outpatient way or an in-home therapy-based way, it's specified and it's really targeted to those very specific needs.
And what advice can you offer to parents or caregivers who think that their child or teen might be in need of a therapist?
I think giving us a call or giving your preferred local community health provider a call. If there's urgency, we're the place in the communities that I identified before who's going to be the appropriate urgent behavioral health provider. But just giving our general phone number a call is 1-844-CHD-HELP will be a great opportunity to speak to somebody and find out a little more information.
And how can people reach CHD?
CHD.org is a great opportunity, and then calling the phone number that we have listed on our website or that we're going to provide here today. Actually, it looks like it's on your screen now. These are great ways to access us quite quickly.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit just about triggers.
Yes.
If parents, caregivers, other people involved in their lives are noticing some behavioral traits, what are some of the things to be on the lookout for?
I think when, again, it's when a child starts acting pretty differently from their typical presentation. Some children can get very, very quiet and kind of disappear a little bit, or kind of go quite inward with themselves and be a little bit quieter. It's a good indication of, I should really check out what's going on. Or for a parent to be mindful of, like, what's the setting from like 1,000-foot perspective? What's actually happening here? What could be the thing that triggered them? They also could have, you know, especially younger children, behavioral outbursts. That's the way that children really act out and sort of expend the energy that anxiety creates. So it's really paying attention to what seems particularly different in your child.
All right, Christy, thank you so much for your insight. Appreciate
Thank
it. And we'll have final words when we return. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You've been watching 22 News in Focus, and today we've been talking about stress and anxiety among children and teens with Christy O'Brien from the Center for Human Development. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And to all of our viewers at home, we thank you so much for watching. If you missed any of our segment, you will be able to find it on our website. That's wwlp.com. From all of us here at 22 News, have a great Sunday.